Hello. Welcome back to Me Callo, I Won't Stay Quiet. I'm your host, Lomelin, and if you've been following the series from the beginning, you know that this month we're talking about something really powerful. We're talking about blooming. But blooming isn't a single moment, it's a process. In the first episode, we talked about seeds, those moments in life when something is planted inside of us. Sometimes hope, sometimes pain, sometimes a question that changes everything. In the second episode, we talked about the roots, our story, what shaped us, what we learned from our family, the experiences that made us who we are. And today, we arrive at a moment in that personal growth process that many people avoid. A moment that can be deeply beautiful, but also deeply vulnerable. Because growing isn't just about understanding your story. It's not just about healing what hurt. There also comes a point where you have to ask yourself a very important question. Am I ready to show who I really am? Today we arrive at the third episode of this series, and it's called Opening Your Petals. And this episode is about that moment when something inside of you starts to shift. That moment when you no longer want to hide parts of yourself. When you no longer want to shrink your voice. When you no longer want to live in fear of how others might react. It's that moment when you decide to stop hiding pieces of yourself, to stop making yourself small so others feel comfortable, to stop editing your personality, your emotions, or your dreams just to fit into spaces that were maybe never meant for your true essence. And instead, you begin to do something that can feel new, even a little uncomfortable at first. You start to show who you really are, your real voice, your real story, your real energy. Not the version of you the world expects, not the version you learn to create or survive or adapt, but the version that exists when you start living more honestly with yourself. And the truth is, opening your petals doesn't always feel easy, because when a flower opens, it's exposed to the wind, to the rain, to the sun, but it's also the only way it can fully bloom. And something very similar happens with us. There comes a point in life when we can no longer grow from hiding, when we realize that protecting ourselves too much can also start to limit us. And it's right there, right in that space, where the true process of opening ourselves to the world begins again. So you know what to do. Get comfortable, get your coffee, your cafecito, your glass of wine, or a cold beer, and get ready to chismear with me. Opening your petals sounds beautiful. It sounds poetic, right? It sounds like something that should feel natural, even easy. But in real life, it often feels terrifying. Because opening up means being seen, being heard, being understood, or maybe not being understood. It means letting the world see parts of you that you once protected very carefully. Whether it was your dreams, your ideas, your perspective on life, your story, your wounds, your emotions. Parts of you that maybe not everyone has ever been allowed to see. And the truth is, when you decide to open up, you also accept something very human. Not everyone will know what to do with what you share. And that can be scary, because often the fear of opening up doesn't come from within. It comes from experiences we had with other people. Maybe you once showed excitement for something that thrilled you, and someone laughed. Maybe you shared a dream and someone dismissed it. Maybe you spoke from the heart, from a very honest, vulnerable place inside you, and the response was silence, or judgment, or indifference. Maybe you show your sensitivity and someone told you that you were too much, too emotional, too intense, too dreamy. And little by little, without even realizing it, we begin to internalize those moments. Small moments, but ones that leave very strong messages inside us. Messages like, maybe it's better not to show too much. Maybe it's better not to speak so much. Maybe it's better not to feel so much. Maybe it's better not to try so much. Maybe it's better not to get your hopes up so you won't be disappointed. And so slowly we start doing something that many people do without noticing. We begin to shrink ourselves. We shrink our opinions, we shrink our emotions, and over time we start to close our petals. Not completely, because inside us, that light still exists. Those dreams still exist. That desire to be seen and understood still exists. But we close them just enough to feel safer, just enough to avoid feeling that kind of pain again. And in that moment, that protection can feel necessary. It can feel like a way to take care of ourselves. But here's the hard part about that protection. When you start closing yourself off to avoid pain, you also start closing yourself off to life. You protect yourself from rejection, but you also protect yourself from connection. You protect yourself from judgment, but you also protect yourself from opportunity. You protect yourself from being hurt again, but you also protect yourself from being deeply seen, from being deeply loved. Because real connection, deep connection only happens when someone can see who you truly are. And that requires openness. It requires authenticity. It requires allowing the world to see parts of you that aren't always perfect, but are real. And there comes a moment in personal growth when you have to ask yourself a very honest question. A question that might feel uncomfortable, but could also change everything. Am I living from my authenticity or from my protection? Am I making decisions from who I really am or from what I've learned is safest to show? Because protecting yourself can help you survive, but opening up is what truly allows you to live. But there's something almost nobody talks about enough, and it's this. Opening up when you've never been hurt is easy. When your heart hasn't been broken. When you've never felt like someone took something truly valuable that you offered and treated like it didn't matter. Opening up in those moments feel natural. It feels light. It feels normal. But opening up after you've been hurt, that's a completely different story because that requires a kind of courage that many people don't recognize. Because when someone breaks something inside of us, something changes. And I'm not just talking about a small disappointment. I'm talking about those moments where you literally feel like something inside you cracked a little. Maybe it was a relationship. Maybe it was someone you trusted deeply. Maybe it was someone you gave the most sincere parts of yourself to. Your time, your love, your energy, your trust. And somehow it ended in pain. And when that happens, something shifts inside us. The way we trust changes. The way we love changes. The way we show up in the world changes. Because after a deep wound, you no longer enter situations with the same innocence. You start thinking more. You start analyzing more. You start protecting yourself more. And without realizing it, you start doing something that so many people do to survive emotionally. You begin to build invisible walls, walls that no one else can see, but you can feel. You feel them when someone tries to get too close. You feel them when someone asks deep questions. You feel them when a part of you wants to trust, but another part says, be careful, remember what happened last time. And those walls don't appear out of nowhere. They're built with experiences, with moments, with disappointments, with silences, with promises that weren't kept, with times when you offered something deeply sincere, and the other person didn't know how to hold it. And so you begin to protect those parts of yourself. You lock them away, you hide them, you keep them somewhere no one can touch them again. And for a while, yeah, that can feel necessary. It can feel like the only way to move forward. It can feel like safety. Because if no one gets too close, then no one can hurt you in the same way again, right? But here's the hard part about those walls. Over time, what started as protection can become an emotional prison. Because when everything is closed off, no one can get in. But you also can't fully get out. You can't love freely, you can't trust freely, and you can't experience life with the same openness. And little by little, your emotional world begins to shrink. And not because you wanted to, but because you learned that it was safer. And that's where one of the most important moments of personal growth comes. That moment when you start asking yourself something very deep, something that can feel scary to admit. You start asking yourself, am I living protected or am I really living? Because there's a huge difference between surviving emotionally and living with an open heart. And opening your petals after you've been hurt means something very profound. It means having the courage to acknowledge your story. It means saying, what happened to me was real. I'm not exaggerating. I didn't imagine it. There was pain. And it means saying, what I felt was valid. The way it affected me made sense. The wounds I have exist. And recognizing that is important because so many people try to skip that part. They try to say, oh, I've moved on too quickly. They try to act like nothing happened. But truly, healing requires honesty. And it requires looking at your story without minimizing it, without denying it, without pretending it didn't affect you. But opening your petals also means saying something even more powerful, something that completely changes the direction of your life. It means saying, my story will not define how much I allow myself to live. Yes, it happened. Yes, it hurt. Yes, it left marks. But those marks will not decide how much love I deserve. They will not decide how much I can trust. And they will not decide how much I can open my heart to the world again. Because healing doesn't just mean processing pain. Healing also means something that can feel even scarier sometimes. It means believing again in the possibility of something good. Believing that there are people who can truly care for your heart. Believing that there are experiences worth having. Believing that your story doesn't end at the wound. That there is still beautiful chapters yet to be written. And that decision to open up again after you've been hurt, it's not weakness. It is one of the deepest forms of emotional courage. Because opening your petals also means something that many people find difficult and something we don't always talk about honestly: being authentic. Because being authentic sounds nice when we hear, right? Easy. Be yourself, live your truth. But when you actually start trying, you realize it's not always that easy. Because being authentic means stopping the performance. It means stopping being the version of yourself you learned to show in order to fit in. It means stopping the editing of parts of your personality, your emotions, your opinions, just so others feel more comfortable. And if we're honest, many of us learn to do exactly that from a very young age. We learn to adapt. We learn to read the room. We learn to watch how people around us reacted. And little by little, we adjusted who we were. We said what seemed most acceptable. We showed only the parts of ourselves that seemed well received. We stayed silent in moments when we wanted to speak. And many times we didn't even do it consciously. We just learned that this was the safest way to move through the world, the way to avoid conflict, the way to avoid rejection, the way to feel like we belonged. But there comes a moment in personal growth, and many people going through healing or self-discovery feel this, when something inside you begins to shift. And it's not dramatic at first, it's more of a feeling, a discomfort, a quiet inner voice that starts saying, this does not feel completely like me anymore. And maybe you're in a conversation and you hear yourself saying something, and inside you know it's not really what you think. Maybe you're in a space where you feel like you have to shrink your personality or lower your energy or hide parts of who you are. And suddenly something inside you asks, why do I have to make myself smaller to be here? And that feeling can be uncomfortable because you start noticing things that used to go unnoticed. You start noticing when you're acting from your essence and when you start acting from the habit of adapting. You start noticing when your voice is truly yours and when you're saying something just because it's expected. But here's something important about that. That discomfort is not a problem. It does not mean something is wrong with you. In fact, it's a very powerful signal. It's a signal that your authenticity is starting to be awakened. It's a signal that a part of you no longer wants to live in autopilot, no longer wants to live in the role you learned to play. And it wants to live in something more real, more honest, more aligned with who you truly are. And being authentic does not mean being perfect. It doesn't mean having all the answers, and it doesn't mean you'll always know exactly what to say or do. Being authentic, it's something much more human than that. It means having the courage to say, this is me, this is my story, this is my voice, and this is how I see the world. And it means allowing people to see who you are without having to edit every part of yourself just to be accepted. And yes, that can feel very scary because when you start living more authentically, something changes in your relationships. Some people may feel uncomfortable. Some people may pull away. Some people were used to that version of you that was easier to handle, quieter, more adaptable. And when you start showing your real voice, your real energy, your truth, not everyone will know what to do with it. And yeah, that can hurt because losing connections is never easy. But here's the beauty of authenticity. When you start living from that place, when you start showing who you really are, something very different also begins to happen. The right people start coming closer. People who truly resonate with your essence. People who don't need you to shrink. People who don't need you to change to fit. People who see your authenticity. And instead of feeling uncomfortable, they feel inspired. Because finally, they can see who you really are. Not the edited version, not the version that adapts to everything, but the real version. And when someone can see that version of you, that's where the deepest connections begin. The most honest conversations, the most real relationships. Because when you stop hiding who you are, you give others permission to do the same. And when you start opening your petals, your world begins to change. Not always in a dramatic way, not always in a big, everything transforms overnight kind of moment. Most of the time, it's quieter than that, more subtle. But it does change, not overnight, but little by little. You start noticing things you didn't see before. You start hearing your own voice more clearly. You start noticing things you might have ignored before, situations where you were limiting yourself, spaces where you couldn't fully be yourself, or moments where you doubted yourself more than necessary. And something very interesting begins to happen. You start feeling a little more confident to try new things, maybe small things at first, saying something you would have held back before, sharing an opinion, setting a boundary, expressing an idea, or simply showing a part of your personality that you used to keep hidden. And those moments might seem small, but in reality, they're very powerful. Because every time you choose to show a little more of who you are, you're strengthening your relationship with yourself. You're telling yourself, my voice matters, what I think has value, and what I feel deserves space. And when that starts to happen, you start making different decisions. Decisions that might have felt scary to do before. Maybe you decide to try something new. Maybe you decide to step away from something that no longer aligns with you. Maybe you decide to speak more honestly in a relationship. Or maybe you decide to pursue a dream that once seemed too big. And here's the fascinating part. Many times, these opportunities don't appear because the world changed. They appear because you changed. Because when you start believing more in your voice, you speak more. When you start trusting more in your value, you take more risk. When you start trusting your intuition, you listen more closely to what your heart truly wants. And when you start showing more of who you are, something beautiful begins to happen. The right people can finally find you. Because when you're hiding, when you're shrinking your voice, when you're only showing a small piece of yourself, it's hard for the other people who truly want to resonate with you to see you. But when you start opening up, when you start showing your essence, your energy, your truth, the world can finally recognize you. Connection begins to feel more real. Conversations begin to feel deeper. Relationships begin to feel more aligned. And not because everything is perfect, not because challenges no longer exist, but because now you're living from a place that it's honest with yourself. And something beautiful happens when you start living from that place. So remember this, opening your petals does not mean the fear goes away. Sometimes we think that in order to show ourselves to the world, we first have to feel completely safe, completely healed, completely ready. But the truth is, life often doesn't work that way. Fear is still there. It shows up in small moments before you say what you really think, before you make an important decision, before you open your heart again, before you try something that truly matters to you. Fear doesn't disappear magically, but something inside you does change. Now your authenticity is stronger than that fear. Your desire to live more truly, to live more aligned with who you are, starts to outweigh that need to hide, starts to outweigh that voice that for years whispered, better not, better stay quiet, better don't try, better don't show yourself. Opening your petals means allowing yourself something deeply human. It means allowing yourself to try again. Try after doubting yourself. Try after feeling insecure. Try even after being hurt. It means allowing yourself to trust again. Maybe not in the same way as before, maybe with more awareness, more self-love, more healthy boundaries, but still to trust. It means allowing yourself to believe again. Believe that there are still beautiful experiences to live. Believe that there are still people who will truly see your value, and believe that your story doesn't end at the hard moments. And it also means something very important. It means stopping apologizing for your light. Because many people have learned to do the opposite, to minimize themselves, to dim their energy, to hide their enthusiasm, to soften their voice, just to make others feel more comfortable. But your light is not something you need to diminish. Your light is not something you need to hide. Your light exists for a reason. It exists to be shared, to inspire, to touch lives you may not even know you're touching. And maybe today, maybe right now as you listen to this episode, you're at that moment in your life where something inside you wants to open. Maybe you've been feeling for some time that there's a part of you that wants to show up more. A part of you that wants to live with more honesty, with more freedom, with more authenticity. And if that's you, believe me, you don't have to do it perfectly. You don't have to have all the answers, and you don't have to feel completely ready, and you definitely don't have to do it without fear. You just have to do it with more honesty, one step at a time, one moment at a time, one honest conversation at a time. Because in the end, opening your petals isn't a perfect moment. It's a process of allowing yourself to be more and more you. And before we close, I also want to share a book that connects deeply with this episode, especially if you're in the process of listening to yourself and daring to follow your own voice. The book is called The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. I'm pretty sure many people have read it, but if you haven't, I truly recommend it. This book is special because it speaks to exactly what we were talking about today, daring to follow your own truth. The story follows a young man who decides to listen to something inside him, an intuition, a dream, an inner calling, and sets out into the world to discover his purpose. And along the way, he learns something very powerful, that often the biggest obstacle isn't the world, but our own fear of believing in what we're capable of becoming. This book touches on so many important themes: trusting your intuition, listening to your inner voice, daring to step out of your comfort zone, and understanding that the universe often opens doors when you decide to believe in your own path. And that's why it connects so beautifully with this episode. Because opening your petals is also that. It's listening to that inner voice that tells you there's more for you, more life, more growth, more authenticity. Not because the path will be perfect, but because your soul knows you're ready to bloom more fully. So today, I want to leave you with this reflection. If there's a part of you that wants to open, listen to it. If there's a part of you that wants to live with more truth, trust it. And remember this: opening your petals does not mean being vulnerable. It means showing your light without apologizing for shining. In the description of this episode, you'll find the Amazon link with the full list of books mentioned on No Me Callo, I Won't Stay Quiet, from the very first episode up to today. And don't forget, every Friday there's a new episode waiting for you. And now we have arrived at episode 4, the last episode of this March series. And it's called Bloom Without Limits. This month, we've taken a deep journey. We planted seeds, explored our roots, opened our petals, and this isn't just another episode. This is the closing of a journey. It's the moment where everything we've learned, everything we felt, and everything we begin to awaken inside us comes together. This is the moment you look back and see how every step, every challenge, every fear brought you here. This is the moment you realize that you didn't just grow, you bloomed. To bloom without limits means allowing yourself to live fully as who you are. It means embracing your strength, your story, your roots, and your. This episode is an invitation to let your authenticity shine brighter than ever, to live with clarity, freedom, and strength. It's a reminder that your growth doesn't end here, that your journey of blooming has no boundaries, that life in all its intensity can be yours if you choose to open fully. So join me in this final episode, the episode where we celebrate your power, your resilience, your light, and where together we finally say, today you bloom with all that you are, with your roots, your strength, and your light intact. Nothing and no one can wither you. So you were listening to No Me Callo, I Won't Stay Quiet. I'm your host, Lomelin. Until next time.